how does one reckon with the fact that like we're in a crazy world where we feel unsafe? And then when someone enters into the darkness, you have a lot of time, so you're granted this spaciousness to not have to rush through a process and to really make contact with like, what does it feel like to feel unsafe?
Today's Into Healing guest is Scott Berman, founder of Sky Cave Retreats, the first darkness retreat center in the United States. Scott shares his journey into this therapy and how total darkness strips away our outside world and reveals the essence of who we are. This is Into Healing, and I'm your host, Mira Kaddoura. Hi, Scott.
Hey.
So nice to have you here.
It's good to be here.
Before I met you, I didn't even really know about this modality called darkness therapy. And now not only do I know more about it, but I also had a chance to experience it. And it was pretty special. So I'm so grateful that you're here to share it with us.
Thanks for having me here.
I'd love to know more about how you came to find this modality and what were you searching for? How did you find it?
In my early 20s, I spent, over the course of like 10 years, about 2.5 years in solitude, mostly up in the mountains in southern Baja, and then also up on Mount Shasta. And in 2010, somebody mentioned a darkness retreat to me. And it really piqued my interest, as that exploration in solitude was something that was really dear to me. And so in 2012, my wife and I blacked out our house and went 5 days in darkness together. And after that, I really wanted to experience a solo darkness retreat. So a few months later, I went back down to Baja and finished building this little earth bag dome. And I went in there for 10 days.
What's the difference between darkness and solitude? Because you could be alone, but not in the dark. You know, a lot of people do that where they go on retreats and they're just in quiet and on their own. But why the darkness part?
When you go into darkness, you completely remove all of the things that are in your external environment. And so you lose your location in time and space. And that's a really unsettling experience.
To say the least, yes.
And you can't escape through your 3D world.
Do you know what the origin of darkness therapy, or do you have any kind of background on it?
Yeah, so it dates back to so many different cultures that have approached it differently. There's the Kogis in Colombia, who the youth or the babies, from my understanding, are chosen at birth through whatever process they have, and they're brought into darkness with their birth mom in the beginning and the elders, and they're in the dark for 7 to 9 years.
Oh, wow.
As I understand it, they do go out a little bit into the moon and the stars, so it's not like 7 to 9 years, but it's a lot of time in darkness and never seeing the sun for 7 to 9 years. And that's one culture. In Tibetan Buddhism, in Dzogchen, they have a darkness retreat practice. People work themselves up to a 49-day dark retreat. Corresponds to the number of days in the Bardo period between when someone dies and their next incarnation. In that Dzogchen Tibetan Buddhist lineage of darkness retreat, it's a very secret, protected practice for the very advanced practitioners who've been preparing their life with specific practices and initiations to go into the dark. And so it's not like an open practice. And then there is, my understanding, I don't know where it went next, but I know there's a doctor in the Czech who then created a darkness retreat center next to a hospital and ran a lot of studies. He also did a 50-day dark retreat and wrote a book, and that was really popular in the Czech. And then it took off in the Czech from that, and there's 30 dark retreats.
Wow.
In the small country
Wow.
of Czech. And it's a pretty common practice there. And it's, in that context, it's pretty stripped of spirituality. It's more of like going to rest for burnout, as opposed to maybe people looking to uncover deeper spiritual truths. So it really, the Czech is the biggest population of dark retreats right now in the world.
Yeah. So interesting. Can you briefly describe the experience, like what one can expect?
Sure. Like, what is a dark retreat?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like you show up and then what?
So we have these little kind of like hobbit homes, caves that we built into the hillside. And then we have the first one we built is an earthen and cob building. So people come in, there's like a mud room, an entrance room, and then...
And no light ever comes into those rooms.
Yeah, and then there's the dark room. And so where we pass food through, nothing comes in. Your eyes never adjust to see your hand in front of your face. And it's mostly soundproof too. So somebody arrives in the afternoon and they have the next 24 hours to settle in, get oriented in the space, feel comfortable. And then that second day, the first full day that they're there in the afternoon, there's a somatic session with Adrian, my other partner in this, who really prepares people for their time in the dark, imparts some of the wisdom that we've learned over the years, and really orients people to a somatic approach to darkness retreat, where one learns and explores and experiences using their body as an anchor. When you go in the dark and you no longer have a point of reference for anchoring into the present, you're either lost in the contents of your mind or you're settled in your body. And so we really orient people into being settled in their body. And then so on that second night that someone's here, they go fully into the dark. Typically someone's in there for 3 days, 4 nights. And then they emerge in the morning and they have that whole rest of the day to integrate. Adrian comes back up. There's another 2-hour somatic session to really digest maybe what's still been undigested in there. And then the next day morning, somebody leaves.
Who benefits from darkness therapy?
Yeah. People come for all kinds of different reasons. Curiosity tends to be at the forefront. And then there's a large percentage of people who come would probably identify themselves as within the spiritual healing arts world. They're coming to explore deeper aspects of themselves, to heal, transform, awaken, things like that. There's people who come who are just coming to rest, unplug, slow down.
So what happens in the physical, emotional, and spiritual sense when a body is put into complete darkness?
Initially, like we had been talking about, is there's a feeling of being unsettled as we orient in our world with our senses to like what's seen mostly or heard. And we have a sense of time. Now we have a location in the world. And we're not totally aware of our interior, which tends to be chaotic, just like our culture. When you go into the dark, all that's gone and you don't have a location, and that really tends to be pretty unsettling. And you don't have anywhere to hide. Those things that are in us that we unconsciously avoid and resist, they start to bubble up a bit. That membrane that keeps our unconscious and our conscious apart really starts to thin a bit in the dark, and it becomes overwhelming, and our nervous systems tend to have a response from that unsettledness, from the exposure, from the things that start bubbling up. And so some people will go into some form of like freeze. And now we tend to preemptively expose that, so people are aware that they can track, like, am I going into some form of freeze? And that could tend to be somebody who's in bed and spends a lot of time in bed, but to them they're super relaxed and they could kind of feel fairly comfortable. And one of the ways that we kind of share for people to be aware of if they're going into that is where they tend to not feel comfortable to walk around the room. It's like they're just in bed, and then they're kind of maybe quickly going to the other places and then back to bed. And so a lot of this, I guess to step back for a moment, is from Adrian, who does the somatic sessions, who has a profound depth and has been with me in this for the last 2 years. She sees a lot more than I do. Once she points it out, I could tend to see it and then track more deeply with people while they're in the dark. So like this kind of people tracking maybe their nervous system response is something that Adrian's kind of brought forward.
Maybe we should just point out that there's three main like trauma responses.
Sure.
And then obviously there's more, but three main ones. Like there's freeze, there's fight, and there's flight, which, fight is you're fighting what's happening. You're fighting being in the dark, and flight is wanting to leave.
Yeah. And so in terms of fight, it tends to be anger is definitely one thing that really somebody's super agitated. And that could be them in their head thinking about all the anger that may move through them, or somebody who's just in a lot of anger. I mean, there was somebody some months ago, and it was clear to me that he was in fight. I asked him, do you feel like you might be in resistance to something? And he was like, oh yeah, but, and then it was just like, and just how we have really good excuses for how we feel and how we justify it or whatever it may be, so that we actually aren't in the feeling. And then flight tends to be people who, it could even just be as simple as ruminating about not being there. So it could be somebody just thinking about all the happy things that they're going to do when they leave and just constantly.
They've already left.
They're gone. But like, since it's in this happy way, it goes through this filter for them of like, it's a good thing because, and so it's not really recognized as a way of dissociating from the discomfort that is
Of
right
the present,
there.
Yeah.
And so having, the experienced support so that somebody's able to see what they can't see through someone asking questions, through maybe delicately pointing, through suggested explorations, so somebody can begin to be more honest with what's happening and see all the mechanisms that they have.
What's so interesting about this is when I went in, the first 2 days were actually really joyous. Like, I was so in my body. I was so present. I wanted to chant and sing and move. And like, I was like, I don't know what they're talking about, these trauma responses. Like, I feel none of that. Like, I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. I'm moving around. I'm doing all the things. I'm really aware of my body and my senses and really trying to like be in the joy that I feel. And it wasn't until the evening of the second night when we had that conversation, and I don't even know when how that conversation came up, but you came to check on me, and we started to talk about how once you were sitting around with your wife and a few friends, and the women were talking about how, as women, we move around the world not feeling safe. And the women asked the men, do you guys ever feel unsafe in the world? And the men were like, I don't know what you're talking about. And it was that conversation that completely, I think, went somewhere in my subconscious. And I went to bed that evening. But then the next morning when you came to like tend to the fire and put in wood, normally what you would do, you would say, good morning. And then literally a minute or two later, I would hear you putting wood in the fire. So you said good morning, and then you did nothing. You didn't put any wood in the fire. And I was like, holy shit. I'm in the middle of nowhere. I'm a woman. I'm in the dark. There's a man I just barely met outside. It's so crazy how such a small thing took me out of this like experience where I had been very present, and all it took is like this small conversation about women feeling unsafe in the world, and then something that triggered that, and I was like totally in this animal body that was like ready to attack. And that was for me like, oh, now I get it. Now I get how these bodies like process these things, this experience basically of being in the dark, and that made it really real for me. I think you felt bad about like.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes when I go up with people, we just enjoy the silence together, and so because I usually don't necessarily say something beforehand with the silence, and that may make some people uncomfortable, and they never say anything. It may make some people uncomfortable, and they don't even know that it's making them uncomfortable because they're already, all the different things. But it was clear after you said something that I was like, oh, okay, yeah. It definitely triggered some fear. Yeah.
Yeah, it was so wild.
The other thing in there too was that in that conversation of women certainly not feeling as safe as men in the world, and then going in the dark, and there is a feeling of feeling maybe safe. Like I do hear that from a lot of women.
Oh, the first 2 days I felt completely safe. It wasn't until that conversation happened and I think something in my subconscious was activated.
And then also about women being always looked at and watched.
Hypervigilant.
That was like another, when I was sharing with someone and one of the people on my team was there, and she's like, and women always feel like they're being watched. And then I shared that with my wife, and she was like, well, don't you? And I was like, no, I definitely don't feel like I'm always being watched. And then there's a few other people that we shared with, and all those women asked their partner, well, don't you? And there is the feeling of feeling safe and not being watched. That does create a relief in the nervous system.
I think definitely that's what happened to me the first 2 days. Like there was a stripping away of all the things that I'm used to that just allowed me to really feel joy in my body and feel, not being watched, not being judged, not feeling like I need to do anything because all day long I have to do stuff. Like there was so many things, so many layers that were stripped away that I was like, oh my God, and it was like it was a revelation for me when so many things kind of got stripped away to find that.
Yeah. And when we look at the arc of someone in the dark, there's a lot of melatonin that happens that first day. I think we talked about that. And so for some people, that first day, and sometimes somebody has the great benefit of it spilling into the second day where there's just so much, the body is so rested and relaxed.
Yeah. Well, that was huge for me. The first 2 nights I slept like, I don't think I've slept that way since before being pregnant, 8 years ago. But the third night, I slept nothing.
And that tends to happen when the sleep kind of stops. That's also, for most people, when the anxiety and unsettledness comes in. Like also coupled with that interaction we had, like when people are done, when the melatonin, that cycle's done, and people are just fully in the space and sleep isn't really as prevalent, that's when also it becomes like, because while sleep's there, it's almost a relief. Somebody is feeling settled and relaxed in their body because they are sleeping. But once that gets pulled away, there is no escape to sleeping once that's done. And so that then does bring an amazing invitation, because a lot of the things that we do are to almost cover our anxiety. And we're a culture of anxiety and shame. So then we're a culture that just covers how we really feel. And then in the dark, the anxiety is so present and it's harder to cover. And so that's the nervous system responses and the different things that people do. And that there's like one question that a lot of people ask, and maybe you were at, is like, how do I prepare? Like, how does one prepare to go into the dark? And we've found that really no amount of meditation sets somebody up for a successful time in the dark. But then I guess we'd have to define like a successful time in the dark would just be it tends to be a very simple, settled, connected, rested time. And that it tends to be people who have a genuine sincerity, to be humble and honest. Like, humility is the door, because it's not like plant medicine where you're going to have this mind-blowing peak experience that's going to make you feel spiritual, or like, it's not a big experience. Not that plant medicine always has to be big and positive. It can be big and
like
scary, but
a lot of small experience.
Very small. It's like really tiny, and that's the humility to like where it's almost seemingly nothing special. Once you get into that door, there's a lot on the other side. But then it's also like you're in the fear and the anxiety and the disappointment and the shame and all of that. But then there's a warmth, there's a nurture, there's like a depth that emerges as you get into it. And it comes from like the connectivity and not the bigness of an experience. And so it's kind of counter to that movement.
Or just culture in general.
And culture and
right, we're
and culture in
rewarded
general.
for the big things.
Totally.
You know?
We're rewarded for the big things, and then for the big experiences, and then it's just a completely different movement in the dark.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so interesting because when I went into that fight response, I spent the whole day really processing where that fear came from. And it actually made me think, like, is it a fear of men? Is it a fear of being a woman in the world? Is it a fear? When was the first time I felt that kind of fear? So I spent the day using all my tools to calm my body down, but also just thinking about, like, where did that come from? Where did that come from? Like, trying to create an awareness of trying to get to the source a little bit and trying to process where that came from. Does it come up often? Does it not come up? Is this the first time it came up? And really trying to see if it's like, is it mine? Is it intergenerational? Like, just like all the questions that I ended up asking myself that day while I was also grounding my body. But it was a really interesting process because I got curious about that fear. And then I started thinking about my daughters too, about like, there's only so much I'm going to be able to do to keep these girls safe in the world, and they're going out into the world that is inherently unsafe, which, I normally in my normal life, I don't have space to think about that at all.
And who wants to tend to the feelings of being unsafe?
Yeah.
Right? We just do all the things that we need to do to feel safe. And like your question of how do we reckon with being unsafe in the world? And I think being in the dark gives somebody the opportunity. And when somebody genuinely comes in and they're wanting to explore some of these things, as opposed to people who come in and want a peak experience have the hardest time because like you're in the wrong space, or who want to like achieve grand spirituality, which like tends to be quite a trap. I think it can tend to lead, and it definitely did for me, people astray, where now you're looking away from actually where you're at. Because there's this thing that's greater and bigger and better and more powerful.
You're seeking outside of you, right? You're seeking something outside of you.
Or if you're even seeking peak experiences, even experiences that are inside of you, but like it's almost because it makes you feel important, meaningful, a soul purpose, a soul mission. It makes you feel good. So there's nothing wrong with it. It's just more
achieving.
Yeah, and it's more like it just covers what's like really underneath it, and tends to build kind of a story about and create a whole personality and image where like underneath it, it's like someone's really feeling unsafe, unworthy, and lack of meaning. And so there's all these things that are done. And so that exploration of how does one reckon with the fact that like we're in a crazy world where we feel unsafe. And then when someone enters into the darkness, you have a lot of time, so you're granted this spaciousness, to not have to rush through a process, and to really make contact with, like, what does it feel like to feel unsafe? And everyone's in a different part of their journey at different times. And so some people need to co-regulate. They need a compassionate witness. They need another nervous system to balance theirs so that they can enter into what's uncomfortable, what's overwhelming, to settle into that. And other people have the inner resources, or for what they're up against, to be able to do it on their own. And when you said about feeling unsafe, about maybe because there was like a man and I was the one there, like, there was a woman a couple months ago, and when I went to check on her, I was like, how are you feeling? And she said, I'm doing my best to be okay with everything. Well, what is it that you're trying to be okay with? Like, what does that feel like in your body? And then just another presence being there, a little co-regulative support, she was just like, oh, like, my heart's racing. I have so much heat. I was like, whoa, it sounds like you're in the middle of a panic attack. And she's like, yes, and I've been in it then she was actually just a little bit of another presence, and was able to be honest with herself, as opposed to fighting it, because how scary it would be to actually. Now, she could have walked out the door, but like, there's also something that we've uncovered in the last few months, is just like people's different mechanisms where they're not leaving. They're just like, because of how shameful they feel, or they feel like a failure, and so people stay in there. So now we really invite people. You get no points for finishing your whole time in the dark. You know, you could turn on the light, you can come out. The most important thing is that you feel settled and connected in your body. And like, if that's not there, and you notice that you're like fixing, that you're in a certain kind of response, like, try to regulate, settle, get in a hot bath, whatever it may be. If you need to, turn on the lights, go out for a little walk, like, whatever you can do. You tending to the fact that you feel unsafe is amazing, as opposed to you managing and overpowering and enduring. That's going to do nothing. We all do that all the time in the world, pretending we're not safe and endure. You actually acknowledging that you feel unsafe and tending to that is going to be everything.
Yeah, that's where the nurturing and the healing happens.
And that's it. And so with her in there, you know, and then she settled, but she was in a flight response. Like, when I asked her, you know, brought her into settling in her body, and was like, is there anywhere in your body where you feel most safe? And she's like, my legs, they feel really strong. And as I was sharing and reflecting with Adrienne, she's like, well, yes, she was in a flight response. She's wanting to run, and her legs are feeling super strong. And as she was in there, she had a challenging journey, as there was a lot of just feeling settled. But at some point while she was processing, she's like, I noticed that I'm like almost scared and uncomfortable being here with you. Like, I trust you, like, and I really love you, and we have a beautiful connection. And like, I don't know if it's like the fear of the masculine and me feeling totally vulnerable and exposed and letting my masculine down. And this was a woman who was a high performing entrepreneur in the world, and so she's like, I have a lot of masculine in me to power through this world. And as I lay mine down, and the level of exposure and vulnerability I have, and then being with, as soft as you are, being with another man, like, I'm noticing that there's a bracing, and just how deep does that go of just the fear of the masculine.
It seems to me like in the dark, there's an opportunity for our intuition to kind of come to the forefront, where usually in the outside world, even when we feel something, or even when we have a tendency to suppress that, because we tend to default to like external factors or experts or things on the outside of us. Do you feel that that's true? Do you feel that it is true that our intuition kind of rises to the top in the dark?
I'd say yes, like, the intuition can rise to the top. And since we're habituated to unconsciously covering overwhelm and fear and anxiety and shame and sadness and anger and such, that we do tend to move in ways that have us looking away from that. And so our, what could seem like intuition has us insulated and feeling safe because we're not touching what's overwhelming and dealing with it. For example, like something happens and we just, and I definitely used to do this, of like, it's meant to be. I don't really know the truth of that, but it certainly makes me feel better, and it insulates me from feeling disappointed. If it's just meant to be, and you're just like looking the other way. And whether that's true or not, that it's just meant to be, one, I don't really know that. I can't really, at this point, know the truth of that. And it makes me feel better. And so there might be a sense of like, well, my intuition was like, it was just meant to be. And like, so now it's like, it's muddled and it's distorted, and the layers of distortion are really thick. And so I think it can get challenging the more vulnerable, raw, exposed, and in tune with our bodies that we are. And the more that we're aware of how much resistance and bracing we have, and we're really settled into that, the more that we're not looking to necessarily gain something or necessarily move for a sense of relief. That doesn't mean like not doing something to make us feel safe, but not necessarily like relief in terms of some kind of way of disconnecting from the overwhelming resistance we have. The more in tune we are, and the more that our intuition is there to like lead us into it as opposed to away from it. That could still like a movement to feel safe, but it'd be like feeling settled in the body, not safe through something that almost takes us out, that feels like it's safe, but it's not. So I think it can be, I think there's a lot of distortion around it. And if one really takes that invitation in the dark to be honest and look towards their connection with what's happening as opposed to what's happening, that then there's a dropping into the body, and then the intuition, I think, really can come online.
Yeah, it's so interesting you mention honesty, because it makes me think of how much, as women societally, we're programmed to not be honest with ourselves and kind of please others, and kind of suppress our intuition, not be honest with ourselves, and say, that doesn't work for me. That's looked down upon, right? And I feel like maybe the dark gives you an opportunity to be more honest with yourself, to really see things as they are, not as you maybe want them to be, or someone else wants them to be.
Yeah, or as the world projects onto you of how you are. And we're all like puffing ourselves up in so many ways through our status or our experiences or whatever. There's a smaller category of people who have come who kind of almost don't even do that because they've been so deflated that they're just kind of settled in a negative self-importance. Of
like what? Give me an example.
Of negative self-importance.
Yeah.
I mean, being depressed, like where there's just a sense, like there's still a sense of like pity as a negative self-importance. Like there's still a sense of, I mean, it's kind of a funny, no one would think of it as a self-importance, but it's a way of defining yourself.
Like poor me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then people like make themselves small because of how, whatever their life circumstances were. And to witness as those people go through the dark, there's almost this inside out of becoming strong and feeling powerful, which for like most people in the dark, they move in the opposite direction of going into the beautiful insignificance. And now all of a sudden these people they are structured differently, that like, and now the world, which has fallen away in the dark, isn't reflecting back to them that they're insignificant, that they're worthless, that they're meaningless, that they don't have all these things. And so now it has been amazing and so humbling to witness some of these people when they're in there that just flower into like a really grounded sense of power. Where there's one woman who came out and she's just like, I've never in my life felt so empowered as I did in the dark. And like somebody where the world constantly reflects that you're kind of not that. And then having that opportunity to be like, oh, actually, like I am just fine the way that I am.
I think that comes from also being able to sit with yourself.
Totally.
Like all of yourself, everything that's come up, right? Because I think people have a really hard time doing that, and once you get to that place where you can sit with yourself and like almost enjoy your own company, there's such power in that.
It's amazing just how, like I would have said in the past in all my time up in the wilderness alone, that I enjoyed my company. It was through the power of managing my experience as opposed to softening, surrendering, and being with what was here when I wasn't in control. And so how nuanced it can be, right, of like how much goes unseen. And then when that opportunity comes to really, when the exposure really comes and we see behind the veil for a moment, like do we quickly close it and then go back into managing our experience? Or do we really step in and confront what we've been looking away from?
Yeah, I found myself surrendering a lot, just even from bowing down in the dark, Like I'm surrendering to this experience. That was pretty profound.
Yeah. I mean, it's been unbelievably humbling and life-changing for me of being with people in the dark. I mean, for one, of like, there's been a few people who have come through who have had like profound awakenings. And then a lot of people who have come through who are just like suspended in stillness. Like their mind stills, they're quiet for hours and hours. And I'm like, what the hell have I been doing for 25 years of meditating? And I orient differently now, but for about 20 years of meditating hours for every day and spending months meditating 10, 12, 14 hours every day. And these people come in and they have no meditation background. They've never done breath work. They've never done plant medicine. And they don't define themselves as a spiritual person. That's not their personality. And these sleeping Buddhas come and they get in the dark and they have a humility and an honesty and a sincerity and a curiosity. And that's enough. And they drop into their bodies and everything slows down and they're not trying to achieve spirituality, that kind of, and then they're just suspended in stillness. I remember one time walking up to check in on someone and I was like, hey, how are you feeling? And he's just like, nothing's happening. Nothing. I was like, well, what do you mean? He's like, I have no thoughts. My mind's completely stopped. I was like, well, how does that feel? He's like, it feels really weird. And I was like, how's it feel in your body? He's like, really weird. And then when he came out, and a couple of days later, and we were talking about that, and I said, like, you realize, like, some people spend their entire life meditating and never get, like, 20 seconds of stillness. Like, you were in it for hours. And just to witness someone who dropped into that, didn't make it create a big spiritual ego or sense of self or grandness from, like, what he dropped into. I mean, he had other profound experiences that ensued from that. But to witness somebody who goes into that and it's like, he's in amazement, he's like, I don't even know what happened. Whereas like within like a spiritual current, it's almost somebody's like, I did that. Like I meditated, I got to that state, I did that breath work, I had that experience, as opposed to like, it happened. It just happened to me. And
less in the ego and more in the just beingness.
Just, yeah. And that was always like, that's always been really humbling to just witness that. And then it's also been really exposed more and more my masculine cultured nature, and then all the hidden ways of the controlling trying to control and watching that like the feminine reigns supreme in the dark. And that it's when even like when the men who come who really drop in, it's when they stop controlling, stop trying to achieve and progress and be something and stand out and be powerful, and they drop into their feminine and they soften, they rest, they listen, they receive all these feminine qualities that has them. And that like the greatness or whatever, that like real amazing sense of connectivity is there. And if there's not like a doing that needs to get to it, there's this Nisargadatta, who is this Indian saint. He used to say, like, in a sense, it was like, what happens when you stop seeking for what you don't have and you discover what it is that you've never lost. And so that orientation of just, if we really just genuinely receive what's here, we ultimately uncover and get to that essence, as opposed to loading up on top to try to get to like what's already here.
Is there a difference how people experience this therapy depending on where they sit on the gender spectrum?
Yes, definitely. Overall, women tend to be more responsive to what's revealed and exposed in the dark. Women in general tend to be more sensitive, more receptive, more available, more willing to...
And more like feminine women, because we all
That's
obviously
well,
have...
so women in general, and then women tend to be more feminine than men. And then but there's men who come who have more feminine qualities, and then women who have more masculine qualities. So does the feminine, but women in general, tending to be more feminine, tend to be more available for being honest to what's like uncomfortable, which I think would have been counter to me before, whereas like men can be more uncomfortable because they could just like power through it and manage their experience. But now I see it very differently, that women can tend to be, although maybe there's some emotions that are harder, like anger, because in our culture, women aren't really like, anger is definitely not good for a woman. Whereas for a man, it makes him feel powerful and big. And so it's almost kind of...
We just get shut off.
It's pretty expected.
Like, people don't want an angry woman, but I guarantee you every woman I know has anger inside of her.
Anger. And then shame for feeling angry because it's definitely not appropriate. But then men, like fear, and like, I think there's more of the difficult emotions that are harder for the men to swallow in the dark, because like for a man, like we had said too, for a man to admit that he feels unsafe is like, I mean, down to the like core animal, like reason you're here is to protect and serve. And like, if you feel unsafe, you're like worthless to the core.
Yeah, who are you?
Yeah. And so witnessing women being more available for what's exposed in the dark and more sensitive and in tune. And I'd been with many different spiritual teachers, and many of them had said, women are closer to God. I never really understood that. I
definitely feel that.
I just kind of accepted that. And then being with people in the dark, seeing how almost, I wouldn't say easier, because it's not easier, but it's just like, it's almost like right there. It's as opposed, there's like more, it seems like there's more veils for some men, and then spiritual men have the hardest time.
Oh, interesting.
In the dark.
Why?
I historically fall into that category too. Well, because they're a man, which is just unfortunate in terms of like really accessing just the essential nature, the essential nature, which is not going to be from a personality that's controlling and being strong and all the things that a masculine energy may have. It's more in that open, receptive, receiving, is more of a feminine orientation, not adding. And so as a man, there's that veil of like, right, we said like confronting the fact that you are vulnerable and helpless. Like that's really hard for a man to do. But that's kind of Pema Chodron used to say that fear is a natural response to getting closer to the truth. And so how essential that is to like, actually, then you have to acknowledge that you're scared, which is really hard for a man. And a woman, I think they're pretty close to feeling fear all the, like walking through the world. Landing in that's a different thing and acknowledging it, but it's really hard for a man. So as a man coming there and being like letting go of that outer shell of being powerful and confident and having it all together and just knowing,
there's a lot of resistance.
Being in control, there's so much resistance to just like letting it crumble and just being like, whoa, I feel anxious and afraid and sad. And those aren't really held up in our culture for men. And then a spiritual man, then they have another even veil of like, they've got it figured out. And like, I'm spiritual, and so I'm having spiritual experiences. And so fear and shame and anxiety and pain aren't spiritual. And even if someone's like, well, I do shadow work, it's like, yeah, well, I do shadow work to get to the good stuff, you know, as opposed to like, it's just all inclusive. If you're looking towards one thing as another, then like if fear is less than whatever, then you're not, are you really genuinely settling into it? Like another Chogyam Trungpa, who was that Tibetan controversial mystic, he used to say, if you ever regard any part of yourself or your experience as the dream come true, then you're involved in self-deception. You have an idea of what it's like to be spiritual. You have an idea of what it's like when you've arrived. Like they're just like baked into, I mean, in New Age spirituality, it's like there's all these things around manifesting and wealth and then like having peak experiences and like even in any kind of, and then who knows how we internalize and westernize all these different Buddhism and all these different things. Was it really meant to said that, you know, was it really, it's such a different culture, and so we strap our own lens on it, and now we have an idea of how it's supposed to be. So then somebody who goes in with their spiritual lens is looking, in a way, to confirm that spirituality, to have a spiritual experience, to feel a certain way. And so then there's almost like a holding oneself in that, or a reaching and moving towards that, because that would confirm the spiritual work. And I've definitely, I mean, I'm sure I still have subtle ways that I fall victim to that, and I'm trapped in that. And there's definitely been lots of ways that I've uncovered that.
And you know, this very Western society says you're only worthy if you achieve.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. And so now we've taken spirituality and made it an achievement, because resting in simplicity, and a lot of that is driven by men. Right, a lot of the spirituality is driven by men, and I think and how we hold the dark retreats is like, and the orientation now that we bring is really birthed mostly from Adrian. So it's got the feminine kind of, I follow with her as kind of holding the container and keeping me in check.
She's amazing.
And pulling the rug out from under me and exposing me all the time as all the different things that I do.
You know, after I sat with Adrian, I had written in my journal something that I actually was able to read. I wrote, healing is about keeping this body clear, connected, and flowing. And I remember writing that down, and I'm like, we don't think about that very much, you know? We don't really think about healing in that way.
And so what were your sessions like? I mean, you haven't really shared much about your experience or gone in that you were just recently here. But my initial question right now is just like, what was that experience for you with Adrian? Yeah.
Oh, they were really powerful. I think there was things that I didn't even know were there with Adrienne. You know, like I remember her just being like at my feet. And after being there for a while, and maybe I should just even say Adrienne's a craniosacral therapist and somatic experiencing therapist. And just her being at my feet, at some point, I felt a really sharp pain. And I think she even said, you know, what are you feeling? And I said, I feel a really sharp pain in my, you know, foot. And she's like, okay, continue to kind of breathe through that and move through that. And I remember like feeling it super intensely and then feeling it release. And I was like, it's so insane, the things that are in our bodies that we're unaware of. There's definitely something that was stuck there, an emotional imprint or something, right, that needed to be released. But until this person was there to support that, it wasn't able to like make its way out of the body. And it just made me really think, you know, it happened a few times. Like she also was like close to my rib cage at some point, and something like she was like, oh, there's something here. What's here wanting to be released? And it was so interesting to me whenever I do any session that are kind of very in the body somatic, I'm always so curious and surprised at things that are there that come out, because I'm like, I had no awareness, you know. And it's like, I love all these books, you know, The Body Keeps a Score, When the Body Says No, all these books, right? Because they teach us that all our life experience, we think we've dealt with things. We think we've like moved on, we've dealt with them, we've all that stuff. But the body has recorded everything. You know, even if we want to deny it, even if we want to forget about it, even if we've moved on from it, there's so much truth in the body. And until we like face it, we can't get free. You know, like we need to be in relationship with the body so we can like release all the things that aren't serving us. And, you know, it goes back to a lot of different people talk about this, just how so much of disease comes from all these things in our bodies that are stuck, that have no way to move out, you know. And that's why so many different healing modalities really help unlock these things, whether it's breath work or darkness therapy or whatever, you know, they help, or somatic work. They help us work through unconscious things that are stored in our bodies and help us release them. So I didn't know what to expect when you said, oh, you know, Adrienne's going to support you to get into, and I was like, oh, I feel ready, you know. But it was really supportive. And I think it was even more so, like it was really supportive going in, because she explained so much of what to expect, which was really, you know, I knew just from like watching a few videos, and, you know, but she really made me aware of like how to really tune into the animal body, how to really, and that's why I think I was so aware of like what was happening when I picked up the fork. And that's why I was also aware the first 2 days that I was actually really like connected and present, and like there was nothing there, nothing was being activated. But it was really, I thought, powerful on the back end, because it helped me process the whole experience, you know, especially the experience of my fighting body kind of being activated. And that felt really supportive, where I felt complete after that, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt like I wasn't leaving with anything that was unprocessed.
Yeah. Beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah, it's cool. It's cool to learn about yourself.
Yeah, definitely.
You're like, hello there. This body that I live with every day that I know so little about. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, we think that we're here to connect to other people and learn about other people, but really there's this, right? Mm-hmm. And this is not going anywhere.
It's ultimately where we connect with other people through, really feel other people through.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
If everyone out there got a chance to experience darkness therapy, what would our world look like?
Well, I mean, again, I'd go back to like experiencing darkness retreat within a container that's held in the more kind of like feminine orientation of receiving and being honest. That if that was really a thing that a lot of people got to experience in this world, it might slow down the pace of progress. Things might not be moving as fast, and there would be a real profound honesty that would really allow more of a spectrum of what we really are, as opposed to this front of ultimately this. We might really expose how unsafe we feel, and then all the things that we do to feel safe, to feel meaningful, to feel important, and to feel worthy. And for somebody who's really ready to let that be exposed with the proper support and the gift of the darkness, that to see that and to settle in, then I think so much of the habituated movement would slowly kind of end as we really settle into an authentic and honest connection with our exposed, raw nature.
You are a father to 2 kids. How has this therapy influenced the way you parent?
It's definitely exposed the ways that I try to control my kids. And expose the ways that I like unconsciously will try to like maybe inhibit fear even. Like it could even be like, I'm afraid of the dark, and it's like, oh, it's fine, you've got nothing to worry about. And I'll even still see my like knee-jerk reaction to say that. I mean, because logically it makes sense. There's no freaking monsters under your bed or in the closet. Like it just.
But as we've seen through everything we talked about, there is.
That doesn't actually matter. And so to like.
There are plenty of monsters in there.
Something that Adrian, I constantly get brought back to with Adrian and witnessing people in the dark is that there's to really honor the nervous system. That's actually really happening for that person, and to bypass it, then like I'm then teaching my child to bypass fear. That like if you're in fear, you lose my connection, and because I don't think that fear is a worthy emotion, and so then when you feel fear, you're gonna feel anxiety or shame, and then you're gonna do something to cover that. You're gonna manage your experience and get whatever someone does. Shuts down and dissociates and feels really small or gets really big to feel safe. And so now it's like there's monsters under, like I'm scared, and it's just like there's nothing here, don't worry about it. Then it's like, oh, instead it's like, what does that feel like? Like what does it feel like, to be scared? Or like, yeah, I understand, I feel scared sometimes too. Like what would help you feel safe? Because a child they are intuitive, they're responding to their body. I mean, they're starting to build constructs in all the ways, the things that they need to do to belong and feel connected, and then thus what they need to do to like repress and resist what's really being felt, because that doesn't help them belong, but like it's less. And so to really honor what's real for them and to be with them. And fear was just one example, as like I do see myself. My immediate response is just like, I don't have time. And so just there's nothing to be scared of, let's move on. But like to really pause and really honor what's being felt, and to really be with that and give them the space to explore what's that like, and not that they need to be a certain way to get approval, that they need to be a certain way to have connection, that like, which is hard in a world that moves fast. And so to make that time to pause and give space for whatever's authentically moving in the body to be there, and not like necessarily holding one as better than the other.
So true. For those unable to go into darkness therapy or to a darkness retreat, how can we get a similar experience and feeling of embodiment in our daily lives? Is there any practical tips or any wisdom you can share there?
I think spending some time laying down, I mean, on the earth, out in like nature, ideal, but it could even be like in bed or on the floor, on the couch, and just like really attuning to one's like body, like feeling what we're feeling with this like felt sense of receiving, like just to like feel like what it feels in your body to receive. And to just spend time laying down. There's no goal. There's nothing to gain. You're not going to have anything to show for yourself. There's no way to gauge your progress or gauge anything. It's just receiving and attuning to what's happening in your body. And just being in the simplicity of that, I feel like is one of the best ways for people to prepare for the dark. And also to really drop into what the darkness has to offer, to like really begin to be receptive and to notice when we come into a conflict with something that we're not willing to receive or it's too overwhelming to receive, and to just to note that. Not that we need to change it and then manage it and force ourselves to do it, but just really taking note of like when we hit those edges and what it's like in our body to just receive.
Thank you, Scott. I appreciate you coming to share.
Thanks for having me here.
Yeah, you're welcome. If you enjoyed this conversation, please like, subscribe, and share with a friend. You can connect with Into Healing on TikTok and Instagram for more inspirational and behind-the-scenes content, and visit our website, intohealing.com, for transcripts and other goodies. Thank you for joining us.